don't want to make this a storytelling marathon, but there are 3 little stories to add as ingredients to the pot we're cooking up relative to the inward and the outward and connectivity. The first is a story about the great Sufi Al-Ghazali, who was on a pilgrimage, and he came into a certain town and he was confronted by a young man who started to throw derision at him. You know, I know about you Sufis, and so on. And the Al-Ghazali said to him, well, do you know the way of Sufis? And the young man said, no, but people have told me about you. And so with that, Al-Ghazali took off a ring from his finger and he handed it to the young man and he said, go across to the marketplace over there, to the flea market stall, and ask the vendor there how much value this stone is worth. So the young man took the ring over and he came back in a very short while and he said, oh, the vendor said it was just a bauble, it's hardly worth anything but a few copper coins. And Al-Ghazali said, well, you know, down in the main street, just down here, there is a jeweler shop. Take the ring there and ask the jeweler the value of this stone. So the young man came back in a short while in a very flustered state, and he said, oh, the jeweler said that this stone was of inestimable worth. He would not be able to name the price of its value. And so Al-Ghazali just looked at the young man and he said, you see, if you want to know the value of a gem, you have to become a jeweler. And then there's a story about a king who insisted on perfection in absolutely everything in his life. But his most prized possession was a flawless diamond, which he took out from time to time to admire its beauty and its perfection. But one day, a terrible thing happened. It slipped out of his fingers and fell to the floor, and when he picked it up, it had a great crack right through it. The king was totally mortified, and he sought everywhere for someone who could repair this diamond, but no one was able to do so, until one day a certain man came along and said, I can make it even more perfect than what it was before. So the king readily gave over the diamond to this person, who took it away and brought it back a few weeks later. And when the king picked it up and looked at the floor, the crack was still there. But the man said, look. And when the king looked more closely, he saw that an exquisite rose had been carved at the head of the stone, so that the crack was the stem which led to the rose which bloomed from its crest. The third little story is about a young man who sought to become a master jeweler. So he apprenticed himself to a jeweler who specialized in faceting diamonds. But when the apprentice started to work with the jeweler just said to him, before you can become a master jeweler, you have to be tested. So he was just given menial tasks. he would be given the jobs of polishing the instruments which the master jeweler used, and months and years went by, and whenever the young man inquired about when he was going to start to learn to be a jeweler, the jeweler would say, to become a master jeweler, you have to be tested. Now one day when the young man asked him this question, the jeweler said, look, here is a diamond I have faceted and made into a ring for a very rich merchant. Look. And with that, the jeweler took the ring and, using the diamond stone, he etched a word in a piece of glass. And then he said to the young man, now take this ring and deliver it to the merchant, but be very careful, because it's worth more than what you could earn in half your lifetime. So the ring was placed in a little leather pouch, and the apprentice carried it very carefully, waiting for a time of day when there would not be many people around. But unbeknownst to him, there was a robber lying in wait. And when he hadn't got too far down the road, the robber accosted him and said, I know that you're carrying something of great value. Give it to me. Now the apprentice looked at this robber, who wasn't of very great stature, and he said, well, how are you going to take it? And with that, the robber took out of his pockets 2 pistols and said, with these, and pointed them at the young man, who took the leather pouch out of his pocket and gave it to the robber. Now the robber was about to take his leave when the apprentice said, not so fast, not so fast. You cannot leave me like this, because my master will think that I've stolen the ring. So the robber said, well, what do you want me to do? Shoot you? And the apprentice said, no, but you can shoot my coat. So with great aplomb, the robber took his pistols and blasted some holes in the coat. And then he was about to leave, and the apprentice took off his hat and said, well, what about the hat? But just when the robber was about to shoot holes in the hat, the guns went click, click, and nothing happened. So the young apprentice says, does this mean that you're out of ammunition? And the robber said, well, I guess so. So with that, of course, the young apprentice grabbed him and took back his leather pouch with the ring in it, and the robber went to run off, and the apprentice just let him go. And then he made his delivery of his jewel and came back to his master and told him the whole story, showing him his coat and his hat. And the master, of course, well, said, don't worry about your coat or your hat. We're going to buy you a new one. And by the way, you are now becoming a master jeweler. We're exploring the inward and the outward, and connectivity. Let's put our ingredients into our pot. See what happens. What happens when the three dimensions of existence come together and we have a taste of what we can call the divine life? Body, mind and spirit, as they're sometimes called, merged seamlessly together to bring a state of Satchitananda, or existence, knowledge and bliss. But what about this duality that's described as the inward and the outward? What happens for us when they come together and join this state so painfully attained? And how do these stories help us to recognize what it is we've become, having done the hard yards of bringing together the dimensions of our life, and then reconciling what appears to be inward and outward. How do we know when it's done? How do we know when what we're cooking up is ready to be shared, just like this third story? Is it like in the story where the diamond can etch on glass, and whatever that means? Cook up these stories yourself. Recognize the symbols, their meaning.